Alright, I'm sorry you're still having trouble with 5, 6, 7, and 10, or I believe that's what you said. Let's see, I wrote it down. Yeah, 5, 6, 7, and 10. Let me go over them really quick, and don't panic too much. There's a little bit of memorization here, but write them down in your notes and look over them. And I'm going to include 2 websites that have what I'm talking about. Okay, um, but let me go over these for you. Number 5. If we see here, we have a square, and with these lines right here, okay, the single lines on the sides, that tells us that every side with a single line is the same length. That tells us this is a perfect square, okay, with one side equaling 45. Well, if one side is 45, then all sides are 45, because that line tells us that they're all the same, okay? Now, we know it's a square, so we know this is a right angle there. And if we look right here, 45 and 45, we see an interesting concept here. With a right triangle, if you have 2 sides that are the exact same length, then that is called the 45-90 triangle, because that means this angle is 45 and this angle is 45. Don't get that confused with the length of the side. That's the measure of the angle right there. Okay, and so if this side is 1 and this side is 1, this side is 1 times the square root of 2, or just, whatever it is. So we take the side, and that side times the square root of 2. So if I have 5 and 5, this would be 5 times the square root of 2. And so on. It just goes right through it. So it's just x times the square root of 2. Okay, now let's look at this. We have 45, 45. Okay, so there's our x is 45. All the sides are 45. Sorry, I'm off the screen. So if we look, we've got 45 and 45. Both sides are 45, which means our hypotenuse is going to be whatever the side was times the square root of 2. Whatever the side was times the square root of 2. So whatever the side was times the square root of 2. And that's the length of the hypotenuse. Well, as we can see, the hypotenuse is the side we're trying to find. So that means the answer is that. Okay? So that's something you just need to remember or memorize, that the length of the 2 sides are going to be exactly the same, and then it's that times square root of 2 for the hypotenuse. Okay, and if we move to number 6, we see one a little more complicated, but we'd see right here 45. That means this is also 45. Okay, and we see 30, which would make this 60, and that's a different triangle, the 30, 60, 90 triangle. And we'll go over that here in a second. We want to find out how big x is and how big y is. Well, in order to do that, we need to find out how big this line is right there in the middle. Well, how big is that? It's going to be the same length as this and that. Okay? Well, think about what we did up here. We times x times the square root of 2. So it would make sense that if we divided by the square root of 2, we would get the sides, right? So it's just basic algebra there. So to find that, then we take 8 divided by the square root of 2. Okay, well, we can't have square roots in the bottom, so we're going to times by square root of 2 over square root of 2. So times the square root of 2 over the square root of 2. And that's the same thing as timesing by 1, because when you divide anything by itself, you get 1. Square root of 2 times the square root of 2 is just 2. So now we have 8 times the square root of 2 over 2. We can divide 8 divided by 2, and that gives us 4 times the square root of 2. And that's where the square root of 2 comes in, okay? So you always want to make sure that that stays there, because you have to do it to the top and the bottom to make sure it stays balanced. So now we know the length of this is 4 times the square root of 2. Great. We have one of the sides of a 30, 60, 90 triangle. How does that help us? Well, we need to think about it, okay? With this, a 30, 60, 90 triangle will have this dimension, 1, and then the hypotenuse is always 2 times that side, and then this is always square root of 3 times that side. So if I were to draw it algebraically, I would say, okay, this is x, 2x, this is x times the square root of 3. So you see how the ratio sticks there, okay? That side is always the one we're trying to find. And using algebra, we can always try to find the missing sides, okay? Well, let's look at this one. Which side do we know? It just so happens we know the short side, x. What is x? X is the square root, 4 times the square root of 2. I don't know why I circled it. That's not the answer. That's the answer for that side right there. Okay. Anyway, so we have 4 times the square root of 2 is our x. Okay. We're trying to find the hypotenuse. Well, how do we find the hypotenuse? 4 times the square root of 2 times 2. Well, that's a whole lot of help. That's like math, all kinds of crazy right there. So let's stop and think about it. Okay. We're taking 2 times a number, 2x. So just put it in parentheses. 2 times a number. What is that number? That number is 4 times the square root of 2. 4 times the square root of 2. Okay? Awesome. Now what's 2 times 4? It's 8. And then 2 times the square root of 2? Well, it's just there. You deal with square roots the same way you would deal with an x, for example. So 2 times 4x would just be 8x. See how I didn't really change the x, it just came down. Same with the square root of 2. You treat it exactly the same as a variable. So now we have 8 times the square root of 2. So our hypotenuse, or the length of that side, is 8 times the square root of 2. So there's x. Okay. Now, how do we find y? Okay. Once again, we have x times the square root of 3. Okay. Great. What is x? X is 4 square root of 2 times the square root of 3. Okay. And like I said, you treat it just like a variable. So now let's multiply them together. What's the square root of 2 times the square root of 3? That would be 4 times the square root of 6. Just multiply them together, but keep them under the radical. Okay, so now we have our y is 4 times the square root of 6. Okay, so you got to kind of remember the ratios. Okay, that, and then just use algebra. Just plug in what information you can plug in. Okay, let's look at number 7. Find the value of x and y. Okay, now what have we got here? It seems like this side and this side are exactly the same length. Okay, that means that this is a 90, 60, 60, or 30, 45, 45, 90 triangle. And if that side's the same, well, this side's going to be the same because I can just visually see that. But yeah, it's, we're looking at that. And this is a midpoint. So as we get through it, we can see that these are all 45, 45, 90 triangles. Oh, that's a mouthful. Okay, so let's see what we can figure out. That is a leg for that triangle. See how if I turn it on my side, y is actually the hypotenuse. Okay, so we have a leg, and the hypotenuse. If I were to sketch it somewhere else, it'd be much easier to see. So if I say, okay, here's the triangle, and I just sketched it through the paper, and I say this is 3 square root of 2, and this is y, what have we got? Well, remember, on a 45, 45, 90 triangle, the two sides are exactly the same. And y is whatever the side is, 3 times the square root of 2 times the square root of 2. Okay, well, what is the square root of 2 times the square root of 2? That'd be the square root of 4. And what is the square root of 4? That's 2. So that tells us that y is 6. Okay, and that gets us started here. We're saying, okay, this side is 6. That means this side is 6. Well, if this side is 6, then this would be 3, because it's half and half, right? So 3, 3 and 3, because we take 6 and just divide it right in half. Well, if that's 3, the two sides are exactly the same. So that would mean x is 3. Okay, so sometimes you got to go through it logically, and mathematically we could find it. We could say, all right, 3 square root of 2, because remember, the two legs are exactly the same. And if they're the same, we say, all right, we know the hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is 3 times the square root of 2. To find the leg, we divide that by the square root of 2. Well, square root of 2 divided by the square root of 2, that's just 1. 3 times 1 is 3. So mathematically, we can find it as well. And that's how we go through and find number 7. Okay? And finally, number 10. Let me find my paper here. Number 10. We've got the same situation going on here. We're trying to find 3 variables, x, y, and z. Okay? We've got a 45, which makes this a 45, 90 triangle. We've got a 60, so this would be 30 and 90 triangle. So we've got, just like the other one, we've got the two triangles next to each other. If this is 45, 45, this is x, that would make that also x. Because remember, the two sides are exactly the same. Okay? And the hypotenuse is x times the square root of 2. Okay, well, I know the answer. Okay, so I know that x times the square root of 2 equals 12. So let's solve for x. We're going to divide by the square root of 2. Those cancel out, and we're going to get x equals 12 over the square root of 2. Because whatever you do to one side, you do to the other. So that's, as you can see, why you take the hypotenuse and divide it by the square root of 2. Well, we don't like square roots in the denominator. We can't simplify that any, but we don't like square roots in the denominator. So we're going to multiply both sides, both the top and the bottom, times square root of 2 over the square root of 2. Same thing as just timesing it by 1. Square root of 2 times the square root of 2 is just 2. And that's 12 times the square root of 2. Okay, now we can do 12 divided by 2, and that gives us 6 times the square root of 2. Okay, so now we have one of them. We know what x is. Okay, now with this other triangle, we already know one length is the 12. Okay, now because this is a 30 degree, think about it, it's squishing it more. Okay, so if I use my fingers, we squish it down to 30 degrees. That's going to make y the short side. This one is going to be, z is going to be 2y. Remember the ratio here? Let me pull it back up. x, the hypotenuse is 2x, and the long side or long leg is x times the square root of 3. So let's look at this. We have 2y, so this would be, we have it, it's 12, okay? So that means that we can take our scratch paper and say, all right, 12 equals, and that would be the x or y, we're just going to say y, times the square root of 3. Because remember, we're using y as the short side, 2y is the hypotenuse, and y times the square root of 3 is the long leg, right there. Okay, so if that's the long leg, let's just solve for y. Divide by the square root of 3, divide by the square root of 3, and we're left with y equals 12 over the square root of 3. Okay, now we don't like those in the bottom, so we're always going to get rid of the square roots in the denominator by multiplying by 1 over 1, and that gives us 12 times the square root of 3 over 3. Square root of 3 times the square root of 3 just cancels out the square roots. 12 times, or divided by 3 is 4. So it's 4 square root of 3. Now we know what y is. Okay, we know what x is. We just need what z is. Well, z is 2 times y, right? Hypotenuse is 2 times the short leg. So what's 2 times 4? That would be 8. And you treat it like an exponent, so like 8x or whatever. So there's z. Okay, now we have our x, y, and z. Okay, so I hope this helps explain it a little bit, enough that you'll be able to do okay on the quizzes. Let me know if there's any more questions, and let me know when you watch this video, because I recorded it just for you, so I'll end up deleting it at the end. But you know, it gives me an idea of when you watch it. So, all right, good luck.